this is my channel Sew Amelia, and welcome to today's video. It's a bit of a different one today. I thought I would do a sew along. So this is going to be a bit more of a chatty sew along perhaps, and I'm not going to be showing every single detail of the pattern, but just sort of bringing you along with me as I sew the pattern. And the pattern today that I am sewing up is the Fibremood Maya. So I bought my first Fibremood magazine about a couple of weeks ago, mainly because I saw this pattern in it, I'll be honest. So it's this one here, I think it's issue 14, is that right? Yes, issue 14. And the pattern that I saw in it that I absolutely loved was the Maya. So let's see if I can find the line drawings. Here they are. I'll hold them up like that. Oh. So that's the pattern that I saw that I absolutely loved, and I knew that I had a fabric that would really work with it, and it's this Nerida. You'll have to forgive me because it's all cut out now. It's this Nerida Hansen large gingham print. So there's reds and blues and greens, and when I bought it, I just loved the fabric, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it. I just knew I didn't have a pattern in my stash that would work with it, so I've just sat on it, so to speak, or sat in my stash, and I've just been waiting for the right pattern to come along. And when I saw this one, I just thought, I'll try and put a picture of it up here so you can see what I'm talking about. I thought that the shape of it is just a beautiful, simple shape, and I love the darts, the fisheye darts in the middle, and I just thought it would showcase the fabric and be a good sort of, yeah, showcase for this beautiful gingham fabric, rather than, I had a few other dresses in mind, but they just seemed a bit busier, and I didn't think they'd work very well with the fabric. So without further ado, let me get into the dress. So I had never made a Fibremood pattern before, so I didn't quite know how it all worked. So for those of you who haven't, although yeah, there's not many, the patterns all come in this little pattern booklet inside the magazine, and you have to trace them out, and it's quite helpful. There's cutting diagrams so you can see where on the piece of paper your particular pattern pieces are, and then there's specific instructions at the beginning of each pattern about where you need to add the seam allowances. So I did all that. I cut out all the pieces, just used some tracing paper, so you can see, for example, on this one, that's the stitching line obviously that was on the pattern piece, and then I've added the seam allowance there. So yes, you're coming along with me. It may all be a desperate failure if I didn't add the seam allowances correctly, but we'll see. Please excuse my voice today as well. I have caught my daughter's cold. It's not COVID because I've tested several times, and I also had the COVID vaccine, and so I think these two things have sort of meant that I've lost my voice a bit, but I'm feeling fine, and I'm just excited to have the vaccine. My family live in New Zealand. I am originally from New Zealand myself, from Christchurch in the South Island, but obviously because of COVID I've not seen them for about a year now, so that's a bit sad. But I am just so grateful for the NHS, for vaccines, and I'm really hopeful that the pandemic will ease a little and I can get back to New Zealand and see my family at some point. Anyway, enough chit chat. I'm going to get into some sewing. So we're in my sewing room today. Well, I say my sewing room, it's our guest room, which obviously we're not using very much at the moment. So I have set up my desk in the corner, right by a beautiful window, which today is showing a beautiful view of rain, which we seem to be getting a lot of this spring. The first thing I did was serged the edges. This is the back piece, and the invisible zip will go down the centre back. So following the pattern instructions, I think it says to do it at a slightly later stage, but I quite like just getting all the serging out of the way right at the very beginning. So I have serged or overlocked the edges in just a white. I know it's multicolored, so I wasn't exactly sure what to use, but the reverse of the fabric is white, so that's what I've gone with. And I also had white on my overlocker, so I've left it as white. And then the next step is putting in the fisheye darts. To sew your fisheye darts, gather a ruler, some fabric markers, and some pins. Lay your pattern piece flat on the fabric, making sure you line up the edge of the pattern piece with the edge of your fabric. You'll have 4 markings on your pattern piece and you want to transfer these markings onto the fabric. Put a pin into each point on your fisheye dart. Then take your marker and, pulling the pattern piece back carefully, make a dot on your fabric where you can see the pin poking through the pattern piece and into your fabric. Do this for each point on your fisheye dart. Remove the pins as you go and continue marking until you have all 4 marks transferred onto your pattern piece. Now take your marker and join up each of those 4 points that you transferred onto your pattern piece. Now we need to pin the dart into place. Take a pin and put it at the widest point from the top to the bottom. Then fold the fabric and pin along the line that you made, making sure that the pin lines up on the top and the bottom with the line that you drew. You'll want to continue pinning along the line, making sure that you line up both the top and the bottom of your line. Pinch at the point of the dart to make sure it finishes in the correct place on the fabric. Then take a pin and do the same thing you did before, lining up the pin with the line underneath and then making sure you line it up again with the line on the top of the fabric. Continue to pin until you reach the point of the dart. Then turn your fabric and repeat the process for the other side of your dart. You will now have pins all the way along your dart from each point to the centre and then back again. We're going to sew this up now, starting from the centre of the dart and sewing towards one point, then returning to the centre and sewing to the point on the other side of the dart. Place your needle into the fabric at the widest point of the dart. Sew a few stitches back and forth to secure the stitches in place, and then sew down the line of the dart towards the point. When you near the point of the dart, change to a shorter stitch length before running off the edge of the fabric at the point of the dart, leaving the tail of your threads nice and long so you can tie them off later. You can see where the centre of the dart is. That's where we're going to begin for the second half of the dart. So turn the fabric around and put the needle in again at the widest point of the dart, and then sew the other side of the fisheye dart up exactly the same way as the first side, remembering to go to a shorter stitch length at the point of the dart and leaving your tails of your thread nice and long. Tie off the ends of your thread at the points of the dart and trim the threads. Lay the fabric out flat and then press the dart into place. In this case, we want to press the dart towards the back seam where the invisible zip will be. And voila, you have a finished fisheye dart. So I hope that explanation of the fisheye darts was helpful. Here you can see that same back piece now with some beautiful fisheye darts. I just love the shaping that gives. I'm so excited for this dress, and I just love the way that you can see it with the stripes. Just the way the stripe comes in and out makes quite a feature of those darts, which I'm really excited about. So the next step was the pockets, which I've gone ahead and done. So again, I already overlocked the pockets and I have put them in. There was a marking on the side of the front and the back pieces. I sort of used the marking, sort of put it where I like pockets to sit, and then made sure I lined up. Once I'd put the pockets once I'd put the pockets on the front piece, I then lined them up with the back pieces just to hopefully ensure that they're both sitting in the same spot. So that's the back piece with the pocket sewn in, and now the job that I'm going to tackle next is the invisible zip. So I'm going to get my machine all set up with my zip foot, my invisible zip foot, and I will leave a tutorial down below. I'm not going to do an invisible zip tutorial in this vlog. I use one by Lauren from Guthrie Ghani, which is amazing, so I will link that in the description box below if you want a really good invisible zip tutorial. That's the one that I've used in the past and found really helpful. So I'm going to try and get this sewn in now before I need to leave to pick up the children from school, and I suspect that will be it for my sewing today. If I get that set in today, I'll be really pleased. But yeah, see how we get on. That's that side in. I haven't pattern matched across the back. Patrick and Esme would be distraught. I hope everyone else is enjoying the sewing bee at the moment, but it does make me question my own sewing at times. I didn't pattern match across the back. I just didn't have enough fabric to do that and get all these pieces out. They're quite big pieces. The back is cut in one long strip, so I just didn't have enough fabric to pattern match, and so I haven't. So I will do my best to sort of line up the squares if I can, but otherwise I will just sew in the next zip and we'll go from there. So now I've sewn this half of the invisible zip onto this side, and I need to sew it onto the other back piece. I'm just making sure I've got it lined up here at the top. The pattern calls for about 1 centimetre above where the zipper stops, I think, so that you can put the neck binding on. That is the zip in. So the moment of truth. Catch the fabric in it. Hey, there we go. So yeah, I need to give it a press now, but you can't see the zip. Hooray! So it is, thankfully, I think you can possibly see that. It is matched across the top, so as in there's 1 centimetre on each side. So that's great, and I think that that brown matches the brown here quite well, and I think it ties into that brownish green on the other side. I'm quite pleased that that green stripe almost matches across there, and that green stripe there, but then obviously with the fisheye darts and everything else it sort of gets a little bit out of alignment further down. However, I think I'm happy with that. I'm going to go and give this a press and then quickly check the instructions and work out what the next step is. So the next step is sewing up the back seam to meet the invisible zip. I am pinning this one because I'm going to try and see if I can match up a few more of these lines on the gingham. So I'm just pinning where, so you can see I've got one stripe here where that one meets there, and a stripe on this side where the pink meets the pink, and I'm just trying to see if I can get those to line up a little bit more, just so I can get those cross bands going across the back looking a little bit more lined up and symmetrical, and then symmetrical, is that what I mean? Aligned vertically. There is my back seam, and it has worked really well. I've don't know if you can see, but those stripes do sort of line up, which is great. Welcome back to day 2 of this sew along. I am back in the sewing room. It's nap time. My daughter is asleep and I am working on the neckline binding today. So this is where we got to yesterday. I've done the fisheye darts. I have sewn in and pressed the sleeve seams, and the pockets are in, and the invisible zip is invisible. So we're on to a winner. So there was a pattern piece included for a bias strip, which is for the neckline. So I have cut that on the bias. You can see the diagonal lines. And then I have just pressed that. So to make the bias binding, you take it to the ironing board, obviously, press it in half, press each, then you open it to the wrong side and press each side into the middle, and then fold it in half again and press that, and then open it all out again. Now I'm going to pin the right side of the bias to the wrong side of the neckline, with the idea that once it's sewn on, you can flip it over and the right side will be on the right side, if that makes sense. So I need to also make sure that I leave a 1 centimeter overhang on the edge here, and that will then be folded in to neaten off that edge. So I am going to pin this on. I'm going to use pins today just to make sure everything is lined up and where I want it to be. So that's all pinned into place. The beauty of bias binding is there's a slight stretch to the fabric if you cut it on the bias, or a slight ease. So in order to get the neckline to fit into the length of the bias binding, I tend to just curve the outside of the fabric and then keep that fairly loose, or just hold it gently and then firmly pull the bias binding into place. Pull is probably the wrong word. It's not taut or in any tension, but I keep that quite firmly held while I keep the under fabric fairly loosely held, which should mean that there's a nice firm sort of tension on the bias binding when you sew it into place. Now what I'm going to do is, you can see on there the lines from when I ironed it. I'm going to sew along the line here from the iron closest to this outside edge, and that will hold the bias binding in place on the inside of the neckline. That's sewn into place now, and there are no puckers, which is great. So I managed to keep that fabric out of the way. I think that's the trickiest bit, because you're sewing on a curve. Sometimes the fabric can get bunched and caught up, so it's just trying to make sure that you keep straightening it out as you go. So I think with this stage it's always good to be able to go a bit more slowly and just take your time, and make sure that, yeah, to make sure the finish is what you would like. I've got some overlocker fabrics, overlocker threads hanging out, so I'll just chop them at this point because that's all going to be hidden in the bias binding anyway. So the next step, I'm going to just take it over to the ironing board and just press that down again. So I'm going to fold this edge in and then fold that over, and then you can see, so you've got a beautiful bias bound neckline. So I've pressed that down, and now I'm just going around and pinning the binding down, just so that I make sure, because obviously I've got the line of stitches here from stitching on the binding on the wrong side, and you want to make sure that when you sew the binding down on the top side that you're covering that previous line of stitches. So I'm just going around and pinning that on now. Right, so the neck binding is in. That I'm really happy with. The ends by the zip are still open. You can see I only stitched along that edge, and so but what will happen is, obviously the zip only goes up that far. I will put a hook and eye closure on the top there, and when I do that, obviously by hand, then I will hand stitch those edges closed at that point. So that will be kind of the last thing I do. But yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. It's lining up nicely, mostly. So yeah, my little one is due to wake up in a minute and I will have to go to do the school run, but before I do that I thought I would just quickly talk you through the sleeves. This is what the pattern piece looks like. It's huge, so exciting. And you can see at the top you've got this curve here. Now this is where it gets interesting. So you've got 3 marks on the top, and you can either fold both the top and the bottom ones wrong side to wrong side, and then you get the pleat forming on the outside of the sleeve like that. I don't know if I can show you very well. Yeah, so you get the pleat forming on the outside of the sleeve, like that. There we go, which would give it a lot more fullness over the shoulder. Or if you fold both pleats inwards so that the right sides are together, and then the pleat is on the inside, then obviously that fullness gets taken out and you just get that nice pleat over your shoulder, and then some of that gingham would show through, which should be another really interesting way of doing it. The third way of arranging the pleats is to pleat one side to the outside and then pleat the other one to the inside, so then you get the fullness at the top of the sleeve, but then you get it sort of gathered in at the cuff. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Once you've decided what you want to do with the pleats, you then, this one here gets pleated in like that, this one gets pleated in like so, so you lose those two triangles, and then at the bottom of the sleeve, once you've decided what you want to do with that middle pleat, there are more markings here, and you're going to fold those in. So the instructions are to fold them in, and once you've matched the notches, I should say, you sew down 3 centimeters at each notch. So you've got 2 pleats on this side of the main center pleat, and then 2 pleats on the other side of the main center pleat. I actually made up a sleeve already, so I will show you. So here's what I've chosen to do. I've put the center, I've just pinned it in place so you can so I can hold it up and show you what it looks like. I've put the central pleat, I've made it on the outside at the top and on the inside at the bottom, so you can see that gives a really interesting shape with a beautiful puff at the top, just gathered in a bit at the bottom. Then I've obviously sewn the pleats in on either side of that central pleat at the top, which just gathers it in beautifully, and with the gingham stripes, I just love it. And then at the bottom, like I mentioned before, I have sewn 3 centimeters down here to make, and then I have pressed each pleat, so like I've got 2 pleats on one side of the big central pleat, 2 pleats on the other side of the central pleat, and so you get, oh, look at that, it's gorgeous. Hello again. Yesterday I finished off the pleats, so you can see both sleeves have been pleated at the top and the bottom, and I've ironed the pleats at the bottom. As you can see, I've ironed them open or ironed them flat, and then just to hold them I've put a pin just across the pleat. Then I've got the cuff here, which I believe you sew on, and then the whole thing is a facing really gets folded underneath, so you're only going to see the outside fabric. So I'm not too concerned that it is pink when the sleeve is green, because eventually I think it will be hidden. Right, so that's all sewn in place, and what I'm going to do next is, it's not sewn in place, it's pinned in place, and now I'm going to sew it into place and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I'm going to run to my iron and press this down. Then I'm going to edge stitch along the outside of the facing, so just along here, so not on the sleeve part but on the facing. It's normally called understitching, and I'm going to sew the seam allowance, if you can see that, I'm going to sew the seam allowance down onto the facing, and that just means that when I do flip it over so that it's on the inside of the sleeve, it will sit in the right place and it will behave itself and not flip out all the time. Now what I tend to do, so you can tell where the back of the sleeve needs to be because there are 2 notches cut in that bit of the armscye, and on the other side there is 1 notch to mark the front of the sleeve. And what I do just to help me quickly and easily put the sleeve in is I pop 1 pin in the single notch, and I put a double pin in the double notch. It just helps to a bit more quickly and easily find those notches. Then I'm going to match the center of that pleat where I have actually got a notch with the shoulder seam. So I'll start by pinning that center notch just so that I know I've got that in place, and then I'm going to use 2 pins for that, just to make sure that that pleat, well, I'll put 1 at the notch, actually I'll probably use 3 pins. Anyway, so I've just popped 3 pins in there. That's just going to hold that pleat nice and flat and open, and then I've got the 1 pin in that notch in the center of the sleeve. So then I'm going to take, I can see that single notch here in the sleeve, I'm going to match it to where I've put the pin in that single notch there. I'll match those up and then repin. And then I like to find obviously the end of the sleeve here and then the end of the bodice here, and match those 2 seams up there and pin, because obviously you've got one curve of the sleeve going this way and the arm side going the other way, so to try and bring those 2 curves together can be a little bit of a challenge. So now I just want to ease that sleeve in, add a load more pins, particularly over again. I've got, I don't know if I can show you, I've got the next pleat in the sleeve there, and again I'm going to use a few pins in there just to make sure that that pleat is nicely sort of set in and it's not going to get caught in the machine. So that's pinned in there. I think the trickiest bit actually was getting that, not the main pleat, but that second pleat to just sort of be in, what am I going to say, to get that second pleat sitting nicely. That is now pinned in, so I will sew along, just along that edge of the sleeve and the arm side. I will finish the side of the dress at the end all in one, from the arm all the way down the side of the dress in one go. So right now I'm just sewing in along that sleeve edge seam. Right, here's the moment of truth. So I've sewn along that edge. I can't see any puckers or any material that's caught, so we'll turn it out and see what happens. Hooray! I mean, it's quite bright. I'm going to look like I'm wearing a rainbow, but actually, given the gloomy weather right now, I think we could all do with wearing all the rainbows. So there it is. Ta-da! Isn't it gorgeous? Ah, I love it. So I need to now go in and set the other sleeve in on the other side exactly the same way, and then I'm just going to finish this edge here by overlocking this raw edge here, just to neaten off that sleeve, and then obviously I'll give that a good press. Right, so those sleeves went in quite a bit more quickly than I thought, so they are now in. Then what I've done is I have matched up this underside of the sleeve, so that last seam that needs to be sewn, and then the sides of the dress, and I've just clipped those all the way down to where it meets the pocket, and then I've clipped around the pocket, and then I've clipped down the skirt, the side of the skirt, and I've just clipped all the way down. So now almost the last thing that needs to be done really is I'm going to sew all the way down here. When I get to where the pocket is, I will sew down to here where I can see about 1 centimetre down to where it meets the pocket, just past where that overlocking edge is. Then I'll go all the way around the pocket and do the same thing here. I'll go in about 1 centimetre and then follow the line down there. So yeah, down around the pocket and then all the way down the skirt, and then that will be the side seam done. And probably the end of the sew along section of this video, because the last thing to do, I said to you previously, would be to fold under that facing and hand stitch it down, and then to do the hem. So for the hem, I will just try on the dress, work out where I want the hem to fall. When I tried it on, I am just under 5'5", and when I looked at the pattern pieces against me, they were huge. And I don't particularly like maxi, I don't mind maxi length, but I prefer either maxi length or knee length. I don't particularly like that midi calf length. I don't think it suits my shape. And this seemed to be quite a long, between a midi and a maxi on the pattern pieces when I held it up against my body. So I'm going to try this on. I think I will probably make it around about knee length. You can hear my daughter having a chat. She's just woken up, so this will definitely be the end of the sew along part for today. Yes, I will probably chop it at knee length, but I'll obviously try it on and just see what I want to do in terms of the length and check the fit. And then that will be it done. So once it's hemmed, I will do a twirl, put in some footage of the dress so you can see that. But thanks for following along today. And if you did enjoy the video, please do like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate all of you who have subscribed so far, and those of you who are following along on my journey. I hope you're enjoying these videos. I'm enjoying making them. So yes, thanks for following along. Have a wonderful week and see you in the next one. Bye.